and when you were born.
My name is Willie Justice. I was born December the 19th, 1936.
All right, you don't have to look at it. You can just look at me.
Okay.
Just pretend that's not even there. We're just having a conversation. And I'm Chance Hellman. I'm from the Onslow County Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And we've met before. I don't know if you remember. I was out here a couple of years ago when Miss Barbara was doing a tour of some sort with first graders, and I followed her around and listened to what she told them. And
Up at her place, Papa's Farm.
yes, sir.
Where
And
they were digging potatoes and all that time.
digging potatoes and shucking corn and
Right.
digging for peanuts, and I ended up talking to you for a little while about hog killing then. That's why I wanted to come back and talk to you now, because I remember doing that, and it was
Right.
interesting to me then, and it's interesting to me now, and especially since we want to do an exhibit on foodways.
Right.
And part of the foodways of Onslow County is processing hogs.
Right.
And so I thought I'd ask you to tell me what you remember about doing it, and if you could walk me through the process, how it's done, that kind of thing.
Well, they would start the morning before, or the day before, and they had a vat that they would dig a hole and bury it in the ground. And there's where they heated the water. And they would go to the woods and get a load of pine straw to lay down, that whenever they put the hogs in the scalding vat, they would roll them out there on the pine straw and scrape the hair off of it. And that morning they would have the hog shut up, ready to be butchered. And normally we would kill about 12 or 14 in a day, and we'd kill half of them the first time and then half the second time. And they would have their water and use a thermometer. They wanted to make sure that the water was hot enough so they could pick the hogs, and they didn't want it too hot, because if you had it too hot, then the hair would not come off, and sometimes you had to shave it off.
Do you know what temperature that was that they wanted it at?
I think it was not over 150.
Oh, okay.
And they would always go ahead and dress those. Say if you kill 12, pick 6 of them at a time. That way, when they hung the hogs up and did the gutting of them, then the women folks could get started, with the chitlins and stuff, that they saved the chitlins, and they would get started on that. And when they got one of them dressed, they would go ahead and cut it up so that they would cook ribs and backbone and stuff like that for dinner.
So you'd eat some of that day?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then after that, they would go back and dress or kill the other 6 and then hang them up. They would usually leave them hanging up and let them drain and all till that afternoon, and then they'd start cutting the rest of them up. They had a salt tray in the smokehouse, and they would take and put the meat in there and salt it down, and they would lay it on burlap on the ground that night to make sure before they packed it up that the animal heat was out of it. And then the next day they would come back and re-rub it and pack it down. We had a ice box, if it got a little bit warm, that we could had room to put that meat in it. It was a homemade ice box that was lined with sawdust, and in the center of it we could put 300 pounds of ice in it if it got that warm, which normally if it got warm you could buy 300 pounds of ice and it would last you. Normally left it laying down like that in salt from normally about 4 weeks. It's according to what size meat it was as to how long. And that afternoon, after they got through cutting up and stuff, they took the hog feet and they got all them prepared so that they could either cook them and stuff. The next day, of course, that afternoon, the women, where they had cut the meat up for sausage, and also the lard. They used a big pot that they dried the lard up in. And on the sausage, we had at last had an electric grinder that you would grind that sausage up. And we had a big wooden table that they'd put it on to mix it up and put their salt, sage, and seasoning in it. And after they would take a number 3 wash tub and put probably 50 or 75 pounds of sausage in it, they would take and mix it up, and they had a little frying pan that people would taste it to see if it had enough salt or if it had enough pepper and sage and stuff like that in it. And once that they got it like they wanted, they would take and split up, and part would still be doing sausage and grind it and all, and the rest of them would start stuffing. And they had the casings that they stuffed the sausage in. And
did they buy casings, or did they use the intestines?
Years in the beginning, they used their own. Long at last, they got where they would buy them. And after they stuffed the sausage, they would hang it up in the smokehouse so that it could begin to start drying. And when a lot of times we had a place in Newbern that we would load the car the next day and go down there and sell meat to the local stores down there. Sausage, spare ribs, backbone, and stuff like that. And after the meat had been salted down for 4 weeks, they would take and hang it up in the smokehouse. And they would smoke it with, they started off where they could get the fire going or kind of smoke it and use hickory or oak or something other to kind of give it the flavor. And once they smoked it like that, it could stay off from then right on up to the summer and stuff. Some of it would have a mold on it, but it didn't hurt the meat. All you had to do is wash it off. Also, the next day after that, before we had electricity and stuff, they would take the small pieces of meat and tenderloin and even sausage and put in half-gallon jars. And then they would take and some of the lard and cover over that thing to seal it so that it would protect it.
They didn't cure it anyway? They just put it in the jar and covered it in lard?
They would go ahead and cook the meat and put it in there, and then they would cover it with lard, made it airtight. Okay. And of course the extra lard we used during the summer for cooking and stuff. They didn't know what Crisco and stuff was back then. You know, you used lard for cooking cornbread, biscuits, and stuff like that. Yeah. And for seasoning. And normally we would start after Thanksgiving killing, and usually kill anywhere from 4 to 5 times a year.
Oh, really?
And we always raised 5 or 6 acres of peanut so that it would be peanut fed ham. And we had no problems on selling the meat, you know, during the spring and summer. And of course, by doing that helped to have a little money to buy fertilizer to farm with.
Sure. Did you brand those hams and brand that sausage so that people knew where they were buying it from?
No, not really. I mean, people would come on the stuff after it was smoked. They came here to the house and bought it. Okay. And we had people that come down from up north maybe every year to let us know ahead of time, and we'd save them 2 or 3 hams and stuff like that. We never really, I don't ever remember ever losing any meat like that. The winters were so much different then than what it is today.
What was different about the winters then? Colder. And how old were you when you started participating in the hog killing? When you started doing work?
Probably 5 or 6 years old.
And what did you have to do when you were then that old?
I was a gopher.
Okay.
Go get a pan. Go get a scoop. Go get the lard powder. Go get this knife sharp.
And did that change as you got older? Did they start giving you more and more?
More and more things, yes. As you got older, you helped, dress the hogs. They never would let the gut go, so I took care of them with a knife. and when they gut the hogs, then women make sure you did not cut the gut. Because that made a mess.
Yeah.
But, and then after I got out of high school, of course, I moved away, and by then the farming kind of went different, and everything went more modern. And in the later years, you didn't have the help you had at one time. And he would carry them and have them dressed, and move on Saturday morning and pick them up, and then the family kind of got together. And they didn't want money to help on the hog giving. They got fresh meat to eat, sausage and spare ribs and hams and the liver and stuff like that. So that was their pay.
And then did other families invite you to go to their hog killing?
Yeah. And out in the neighborhood, there was probably 6 or 8 men that would help, and most of them had started many years ahead, and they knew what their jobs were, and they knew how to cut if you wanted your meat cut, everything like that.
Okay. And how many people would come to help? If you're doing 12 hogs in a day, that seems like a lot.
It'd be 12, 14 people.
Okay. And is that common, you think, for other families around here to do that many hogs at one time?
Yeah. Back even in the early 60s, you could ride out through the country and see people in each neighborhood kind of killing hogs like that. And back then they raised their hogs right there on the farm.
And when did that start to change? Do you think people stopped killing hogs and it went to production?
Back in the early 70s. We got where you didn't have as many farmers. They got where a lot of times, if they didn't have 1 or 2 hogs, they'd carry them to somewhere and have them dressed and cut up, and then all they had to do was go get the meat. They'd make the sausage for them and grind, cook the crackers and make the lard and everything else.
Do you think there are still families that do that now? Any hog killing?
Oh yeah, there's, and what they do, usually it's just 1 or 2 hogs, and I don't know whether they're still dressing them home or not.
Yeah.
They're in the Wellses or a place like that.
And have them do it.
And have them do it. And on your place like that, there used to be one in Ridgeland, and if you carried the hogs up there, they had a state inspection that would check that meat. If there's something wrong with it, they let you know.
When did that start to happen?
I reckon sometime in the early 60s.
Okay. I'm gonna move this a little bit closer just to make sure the sound gets it. I don't want to interrupt you because I like hearing what you're saying, but I'm worried that we're going to end up just hearing this rain. We're not going to hear you.
Okay. Well, if we don't, we do it again sometime.
Well, I could do that too. I bet we hear different things every time I do it. Was there a particular recipe that you liked most about what was being done? You said that they cook sausage the day of, to taste it or whatever.
Well, I didn't want too much sage, and I did not want too much hot pepper in it.
Oh, okay.
And we grew the sage, and we also grew the pepper and stuff that we put in it. It was all homegrown.
Okay. And how much was there a recipe that somebody was following, or was it just kind of you eyeballed it year to year?
Just kind of eyeballed it. Most of them that was doing that, they had done it so many years they knew about what to do.
Okay.
It's kind of like making barbecue sausage. You got your own recipe, and you put a little of this in it, a little of that in it.
Yeah. Were there recipes that did get passed down? Do you know?
Not that I knew of.
Okay. What about when you're preparing the meat later on, country style ham and that kind of thing? Are there recipes for ways you cook it later on that you know of? Or?
No, back then on the hams and stuff like that, they, they didn't have it carried anywhere and had it sliced. The women and all knew exactly how to cut that thing, and what was left, they used that for seasoning and stuff like that.
Right, right.
And they used to take and hang the side meat up after they sawed it down, and they would take small pieces of the side meat and make pickled pork. And they would put that in a crock and put a layer of salt and a layer of meat, roll it up, and put a layer of salt and a layer of meat. Some of them would go ahead and mix their water real strong with salt, and they called it pickled pork. And then usually that you can keep it year round too. And we always killed hogs on a shrinking moon, because if you cook a piece of pickled pork and it was like 6 inches by 6 inches, and on a shrinking moon, when you get through cooking it, it'd be about 3.5, 4 inches each way. It'd shrink up that much. And if it was killed on a growing moon, it was all about the same size, and it did not have the taste it should have.
I wonder why that is. Any idea why that was?
No. But back then, most of you farmers went by the almanac. It was signs when they planted crops and stuff like that, and I don't think nobody does that today. You do it when you have time to do it. But,
sure. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I'd like to know more about that. That seems kind of strange. But.
And if on the almanac stuff like that, they have different things. What to plant rooted crops like turnips or rutabagas and stuff, and then others for arch potatoes, and then above ground and stuff. So.
And how much of that went to feed, and how much of it went to just food for the family?
Well, now the peanuts that we'd raise, as say 5, 6, 7 acres, and we would normally dig maybe a ½ acre or an acre, and we'd boil some, we'd dry some for roasting, and then we'd pick them off, and in the wintertime you'd shell them and use them for seed. And the same way with corn. How much corn he needed to raise to feed his mules and livestock on it. And they didn't buy any feed like that. When they cut the peanuts or got ready on the peanuts, they'd cut that hay to feed the mules with in the wintertime.
Was that the same with the corn stalks too then?
Now what we done on the corn stalks after we broke the corn and all, we put a fence around it and let the cows go out there and eat the shucks and the grass and stuff that was still out there.
Okay.
And if we also had cows that we milked, and the cows, if they were milking, we always gave them a little extra feed that we had to buy it, and they got a little extra feed.
Speaking of cows, I have 2 questions, I guess, about cows. If you're milking them, are you making butter and cream and such also?
Yes.
Okay, and y'all churn that here?
Yeah.
And then, go ahead.
They'd save the cream, and they'd put it in either a quart or a ½ gallon jar and sit there and shake it till it made butter.
Oh, okay. It wasn't churned in a butter churn?
No.
Okay.
And then the buttermilk, if Papa didn't drink it, then Mama made biscuits out of it the next morning. Buttermilk biscuits.
And did you ever, was there a recipe for that? Was there something special she was doing there, or just?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
Never did. The girls, I was one of 9 children, and I was the baby, and the girls done the cooking, and we done outside in the farm.
The other question I had about the cows was, did you ever slaughter and butcher those?
Yes, and back then we would do that sometimes a couple of times a year. When the Primitive Baptists was having their association, a lot of times we would dress one and course, you dressed it and went ahead and put it in the back of a car in a tub, and you went around and kind of pedaled it out because you had to go ahead and cook it because we didn't get electricity here till 1947.
Okay.
Now after that, then we still dressed a few like that, and people would buy it and put it in refrigerators and stuff. But growing up, as I say, we didn't have electricity. We had lanterns and kerosene lamps and stuff like that that you.
So all the cooking then was done over a
Wood
stove
stove.
that had wood. Yeah, wood stove. Okay. Now, is there anything else you wanted to talk about with hog killing or cows or any of that as far as food is concerned?
Not that I know of.
Okay, I might come back to it, but I wanted to ask you. Barbara told me that you guys made wine, and that's something else I'm really curious about because Onslow County has a long history of growing grapes and producing wine, but it took a long time for people to do it commercially. It wasn't until the 1950s that there was a Onslow Wine Cellars out in Holly Ridge.
Right.
And that didn't last but 10 years before they sold out. And so I was always curious about what people were doing at home, if there were particular recipes that people used, or if it was just kind of how, I don't know how people did it. That's why I'm curious.
Yeah. What they used to do on the grapes, where they harvest the grapes, was put down tobacco sheets, which is about the same size as a bed sheet, and they would take pitchforks and shake them, and then they would take them and put them on something other to get the leaves and the trash out of them. And they used wooden barrels. I think the barrels were originally probably whiskey barrels, about a 50 or 55 gallon barrel. And they had, people had made a type of a grinder that they would fix them up and grind those grapes, and then they knew how many grapes they wanted to put into a barrel. And then after that they knew how much sugar they wanted to put in there and how much water. And they would take and in the end of the barrel they had a faucet. That's the way they drained it out. And they knew for the first weeks there, they would take and kind of make sure that that was stirred with the sugar and the water and the grapes. And sometimes they would take a rubber hose and put down in there and seal it off, and they'd run that hose down into a gallon jug or something other and put water in it that made it be a little bit under pressure. And after it had set for 2 or 3 weeks or something like that, and even before that they might just taste it, see if they thought they needed a little more sugar. And then once they got it made like they wanted, a lot of times they would take and draw it off and put it in gallon jugs or half-gallon jars, and then they would take and put more water and sugar in it and work it off the second time. Okay.
And did they add yeast to do it, or did they like the natural yeast from the grapes?
We didn't never use no yeast.
It was just
all your recipes today cost. I know the last we made here with peach and blueberry and grapes and stuff like that, the recipes call.
Yeah, they want champagne yeast or Montrachet yeast. Or,
whatever, and they tell you how much sugar to put in there. And but we made some mighty good blueberry, and the only problem with blueberry, putting them cork stoppers in them, you have to put something over them because they blow the stoppers out.
Because it's still fermenting.
Still fermenting, and I mean that would be as long as in December. If you made it in July and August, it'd still be fermenting. And
did it taste better as it got older, or was it better when it was fresh?
It was all good.
Yeah, I understand that. And I read a thing from 1859. It was the first county fair in Onslow. And one of the things that people entered was Scuppernong wine, but one of the things this woman entered was tomato wine. And I didn't know if you'd heard about tomato wine, if you ever made that. Mm-hmm. That's the first I'd ever heard of it.
No, I didn't. My daddy did.
He made tomato wine?
Made tomato wine, and you'd think it would be red. It was a pale green. And it was kind of like drinking tomato juice.
Uh-huh.
And people would drink it, and the first thing you know, they were drunk.
Really?
And after an hour or two, and they kind of come to, and they were dying for something to drink, and they'd drink a glass of water and make them drunk again.
Really? Water?
Yep. But he did. He made tomato wine.
Mm-hmm.
He would start out in the early or late spring and early summer with briarberries. They're called blackberries now, but briarberries used to pick briarberries. He'd make it a little for him to drink along. He'd make tomato wine, peach wine. Sometimes we had a bunch of apple trees, and they would pick up the apples, and we had a grinder. You would grind them, and then you had a press, and you'd press that apple juice out of it, and made apple cider.
And was any of that sold, or was it just for
just
for home?
Yeah, just small. And on the apple, a lot of times they didn't make wine out of it, but they made apple vinegar.
Okay. The wine stuff's just fascinating to me because I brew beer. Did anybody brew beer too?
Not that I knew of.
Okay.
Never did. Because on stuff like that, you had to have a something to bottle it, you know, and put that
Put the cap
on it. Yeah.
What about the wine? It wasn't just put a cork in it?
Just use cork.
Okay.
Either that or put it in a quart jar or half-gallon jar.
And just screw the top on.
Right.
Okay.
And see, on jars like that, if you had it for your own use, you could use the jar over again, just wash it good, you know, and you could still use the same ring, but you'd have to use a different cap on it, you know.
Yeah, okay. Anything, as far as food goes, is there anything that you particularly like to eat when you're growing up that y'all made at home? Favorite food, maybe?
It was all good.
They made all of it at home.
Yep.
Yeah.
Of course, in the seasons, now we had most of the time the year round, like horse potatoes and sweet potatoes. When we planted a lot of field peas, we'd let them dry, we'd pick the field peas, and in the winter time, you'd have field peas. In the fall of the year, you had collards and turnips, and back then I couldn't hardly eat them old bitter turnips, but today they're a whole lot better. In the winter time, sometimes they'd go to the barn and shell some corn and make hominy out of it. And of course, corn, we'd also take it somewhere and have cornmeal made.
Was there a mill nearby?
There was one out at Hall's Run.
Okay.
And in the fall of the year, when we was going to Kinston to sell tobacco, a lot of times they'd carry corn up there. And the people that didn't have the money to pay for the meal, they would take a toll out for grinding it. So you didn't really have to have any money to. Back then things was a whole lot tighter than it is today, you know. And we had people that used to come over here and help us farm, or help when we're gathering corn or stuff like that. And all they wanted was, you know, like eggs and